Well, schools may now also resume with extramural activities. This as learners will return to school today to resume with full-time classes after the rotational system was suspended as part of COVID-19 lockdown regulations. Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga says all schools should implement the full curriculum, including activities such as sports and music. Now, let's discuss this further. We're now joined by Professor Nadine Petersen from the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Professor. I would imagine that the impact of time lost due to rotational learning will clearly be felt, in the long term. I mean, we learn of grade 4 learners battling to read and where they cannot comprehend what it is that they are reading. How bad will it affect us, the impact of lost time?
Afternoon, Nati, and to the readers too. Thank you for having me. I think that we can't begin to comprehend precisely how challenging the loss of learning may be in the long term. Particularly, as you say, in the areas of mathematics and science, and in the area of reading. And those are two areas that worry us greatly. I'm less concerned about the high school program or the high school curriculum than I am about young children in the primary school. Because I think the lockdown and the rotational learning has impacted them much more in these specific areas.
So if you're saying, Prof, that you are concerned, particularly as we speak to foundational phase, etc., and the primary schools and the prep, etc. So what then can assist, in terms of just making sure that the impact is not as hard as currently being predicted?
Yeah, I keep hearing ideas about let's cover the curriculum. What concerns me is this notion of breadth. So we want to do so much. It's all about information. How much can our children regurgitate? What I think will be important as we move forward over the next few years will simply be to concentrate on the fundamentals. Now, what do I mean by that? So if we take maths, for instance, to ensure that instead of teaching the procedures, the things that are easy to manipulate, the recipes, is to ensure that our young children actually understand the concepts. So conceptual understanding, number sense will be very important. In reading, do they have we developed a sound understanding, and I'm not a reading specialist, for instance, of our phonemes, of the language that they're learning in, the graphemes? Have they developed phonological awareness and phonemic awareness? Because these are the underpinnings for learning in these, particularly in reading. But as we move forward, if you can't read, you can't learn content subjects either. So all of these will be important for me. Something that we're not talking about is the learning losses that may have come about as a result of the lack of nutrition. Now, if our kids have lost out on nutrition, the school nutrition programs, that will also affect them. And it's something I don't think we're talking about enough.
So what would that then look like? I mean, I know you are obviously concerned that, educators, including the department, shouldn't do too much when there is so much to do, which would overwhelm not only the educators, but also the children themselves. Now you raise another important point, which is nutrition. So, how then do we best go into, even discussing it and even making sure that it's implemented when we are at the basis now where we are talking and dealing about infrastructure? Still we've got pupils that are not back at school or are still at some level, like we saw in that report in KZN, at rotational learning. So there's another layer to it, which is nutrition, which is also very important.
Absolutely, and I don't think we've begun to speak about it properly. I think that it's not difficult to do an analysis. We've got incredible networks in the country. We've got NGOs who can work together with government to figure out very easily What are the nutritional needs of young children? How do we put resources, school resources that are nutritional, but are also in terms of the basics that are required, reading materials, flashcards, all of these kind of things, to ensure that now that we are back to a full timetable, that all our children get what they require in the year in 2020 to help us ameliorate some of those losses.
Another element...
It just requires...
No, continue.
My apologies. It just requires will.
Another element that has been brought to the fray, it's that of the educators. We saw a report being released not too long ago talking about, from the reading panel, saying that there's a lot that needs to be done to start attracting, more educators, more teachers, given that report which says by 2030, reading panel found that 45% of the teachers will retire in the next 10 years. So as we try and catch up on lost time because of COVID and try to, resume lessons and get into this new normal that we're all speaking about, is there more that needs to be done as it relates to the educator?
Absolutely. I think as universities, there's two things. One is that we have to attract the best candidates for teaching. This is not about simply taking the first students or anybody who says, I want to become a teacher. What we've learned from high-performing countries like Finland and Singapore is that you actually need the best candidates in order to be able to come into teaching, in order for us to develop good teachers. So having said that, we are not finding it difficult to attract students to teaching. This may have been the case 15 years ago, but certainly we are attracting good candidates, students with an APS of 34 and 36, when our minimum is 26. So certainly we find them beating down the doors. We don't have enough space to accommodate the number of applicants we actually get for education. But that is another problem, because we are only allowed from our enrollment management as universities to take a certain number of students, which means that at the end of the day, if we have 300 applicants, we may only be able to accommodate 100. And we may lose out on actually bolstering our teaching core with sufficient numbers of well-educated students who can become the next generation of teachers.
Prof, I don't know how much of this next question you can answer. I mean, just given what you are saying in terms of the number of applicants you can take, which happen to be very good candidates, and the number of applicants that are actually applying. And then you look at the current scenario within our schools, particularly government schools, where there is a shortage of good educators, good candidates, where they're actually having to use student teachers for hardcore subjects, if I can call it that. So then what are we saying in terms of just in terms of the criticism of the quality of the education and the number of students that can actually get into the system to actually educate themselves, to get back into the system and teach?
Yeah. So Unati, I mean, I must be very clear. I'm not saying all universities are producing equally well-educated teachers. And that's a quality issue that the Department of Higher Education and Training has long been trying to address. To what extent are all universities producing the same kind of teacher? And I think they've done a lot of work, but there's still work to be done. As a sector, we need to work together to ensure that our curricula that we present at undergrad level actually addresses the needs of the country, addresses the needs of a teacher who can teach for today, but who can also think about where we are going. We talk about 4IR, technological advancements. Are we producing teachers who can think critically, who can prepare our young learners for that? So, there's a lot to be done, but a lot of it comes down to resources. We can do much more if we fund it better. An old age thing is that in education, you get 1/3 of the subsidy for producing a teacher in comparison to producing an engineer. Now, if that doesn't change, we're never going to change the landscape. We can't have engineers if we don't have the teachers that produce the kids that can eventually go into engineering. So we're always in this catch-22 situation. And I think it's time that the subsidy issue gets dealt with a little bit more critically in higher education.
Professor Nadine Petersen, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.